Naomi Garrett was 37 years old when her father called her on a Tuesday evening in October and said 4 words that changed the shape of everything that came after. He had not called to say hello. He had not called because it was a birthday or a holiday or any kind of occasion. He had called because her father, Elias Garrett, had spent 41 years as a contracts attorney in Memphis, Tennessee. And in those 4 decades, he had learned to read a man's intentions the way other people read weather, quietly, without drama, well before the storm arrived. He had met Naomi's husband, Derek Holt, 6 times. He had shaken his hand 6 times. And in 41 years of reading men across conference tables, he had developed a sense for when a man was performing warmth rather than feeling it. He said, "Naomi, move your money today. Don't ask me why." She did not ask why. She moved it. The next morning at 9:47, a process server rang her doorbell and handed her a manila envelope with Derek's law firm's return address printed in the upper left corner. Inside was a petition for divorce, a proposed asset division, and a financial disclosure that listed the balance of their joint savings account as $412. The account that, 24 hours earlier, had held $319,000. What Derek did not know, what he had apparently never thought to investigate in 7 years of marriage, was that the call from her father was not the first precaution Naomi had taken. It was simply the last one. What came next would cost him everything he believed he had already secured. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The evening before that call, before any of it, Naomi had been at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a cup of chamomile tea, reviewing contract language for a supply chain restructuring her firm was managing for a regional distribution company out of Nashville. The work was intricate, and it was hers, and she did it the way she did everything, methodically, starting from the first clause and moving forward without skipping anything, verifying every assumption before she built the next one on top of it. She was a logistics director. She had been one for 11 years. She moved goods, contracts, personnel, and money across supply chains that most people never thought about. And she was very good at it because she understood a fundamental truth her father had handed her when she was 19 and sitting in his office watching him review a freight agreement. That the only way to find the error is to assume the error exists before you look for it. She had applied this principle to every contract she had ever reviewed. She had, eventually, applied it to her marriage. Her father had told her that in his office on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and then gone back to reading the document in front of him, and she had written it down on the back of an envelope and kept it. She still had it, tucked in the inside cover of the legal pad she used for personal notes. The envelope was yellowed now. The handwriting was still clear. She had met Derek Holt at a logistics industry conference in Atlanta 7 years ago. He had been presenting a panel on freight insurance, and he had a precise, authoritative way of speaking that she had found interesting. The kind of delivery that suggested he had thought carefully about what he wanted to say before he said it. He had asked for her card at the close of the session. He had emailed the following morning. He had been, in those first 2 years, attentive in the specific way that certain people are attentive when they are still deciding what they want from you. They had married in the spring. They had bought a house in East Nashville, a Craftsman on a wide lot with a screened back porch that Naomi had rebuilt herself over 2 weekends in the summer of their 2nd year. She had replaced every rotted board, re-leveled the frame, and painted it the color of the inside of a pine tree. She had done it without asking for help, and without announcing it, because the porch needed doing and she was capable of doing it, and those 2 facts together had always been enough reason for her. Derek had walked past it 3 times before he noticed it was new. The early sign had not come from a phone or a receipt or a changed password. It had come from his mother. Dorothy Holt was a warm woman in her 60s who called every Sunday and asked after Naomi with genuine affection, and one Sunday in March she had said, carefully and without elaboration, "I just want you to know, I think you're a good woman, Naomi. I've always thought that." The sentence had no occasion. It had arrived with the particular weight of a thing a person says when they believe they may not have another chance to say it. Naomi had set her coffee cup down and noted the sentence the way she noted everything that did not yet have a context. She had not asked Dorothy to explain. She had simply listened, and when the call ended, she had sat for a long moment on the back porch she had built with her own hands, and she had thought about what it meant when a mother felt the need to offer that kind of testimony. She was watching. She had been watching for some time. She did not learn the full shape of it from documents. She learned it the way she learned most things, by following the logic of a system backward from its outputs to its inputs. Derek had begun, in the previous 6 months, traveling more frequently for what he described as client development work. The trips were not implausible. He was a freight insurance broker with a national client base, and client development was genuinely part of his work. What drew her attention was not the frequency of the trips, but the administrative pattern around them. The hotel confirmations that appeared in the joint email account had begun routing to a folder she did not recall creating. She found it one evening when she was searching for a receipt from a prior year's tax filing. The folder contained 41 emails. She opened them in chronological order with the same patient, linear attention she brought to a misfiled shipment manifest. He had been planning it for nearly 2 years. The hotel confirmations were not the only contents of the folder. There were email threads with an attorney she recognized as a Nashville divorce specialist. There was a forwarded financial summary that itemized, with clinical precision, the holdings Derek intended to claim were entirely his. There was a brief exchange with a woman named Courtney Rains, who described herself in her own words as someone who had waited long enough and was glad the timeline was finally moving. Her hands did not shake. Her face remained perfectly calm. She forwarded every email to a private account Derek did not know existed, attached a date and timestamp to each file, and then closed the folder and restored it to its original position so that nothing would appear to have been touched. She sat at the kitchen table for 11 minutes without moving. Then she picked up her phone and called her father. The call was 4 minutes long. She told him what she had found. He was quiet through most of it. When she finished, he said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I'm clear." He said, "Then we know what to do." She moved her money the following morning before Derek left for what he said was a client call in Brentwood. The joint savings account held $319,000, the product of 11 years of her logistics income and 3 years of his broker commissions in roughly equal measure. She transferred her documented contribution of $187,000 to a personal account her father had helped her open the previous spring when the first quiet signals had begun arriving. The remaining $132,000 she left precisely where it was. When the process server arrived at 9:47 the next morning, the account he had planned to drain in the 48 hours following service held $412 in uncollected vendor reimbursements. She set the petition on the kitchen table and read it cover to cover without sitting down. She noted every claim. She noted every misrepresentation. She noted the date on the financial disclosure and compared it to the date of the transfers she had already made. She opened a folder on her laptop. She named it Courtney Rains because she had found that naming things clearly was always a more productive choice than naming them emotionally. Preparation is the work. Her father's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Union Avenue that smelled like old paper and good coffee, a combination Naomi had associated with safety since she was a child. Elias Garrett was 70 years old and still reviewed every document himself before he passed it to anyone else, a habit his partners had long since stopped commenting on. He had cleared his afternoon when she called. She spread the printed emails across his desk. He read each one without speaking, his reading glasses low on his nose, his expression professionally neutral. When he finished, he set the last page down, removed his glasses, and said he filed before he moved the money because he expected the filing to be the notification. He thought you wouldn't know until the envelope arrived. He was behind by about 14 hours, Naomi said. Her father looked at her for a moment. Then he said, he underestimated who he was dealing with. That happens when a man spends years looking at the surface of something without ever asking what's underneath. He folded his hands on the desk. The misrepresentation on the financial disclosure is material. That alone creates significant exposure for him and for the attorney who filed it. She nodded. She had already run those calculations. He leaned back in his chair and said, quietly, the way he said things that were meant to be carried, a river doesn't announce where it's going. Naomi, it just keeps moving. She wrote that one on the inside cover of her legal pad beside the old envelope. 2 days later, she sat across from Claudette Sims in a conference room on Charlotte Avenue. Claudette was a family law attorney who had practiced in Nashville for 22 years and who had, by the account of 3 colleagues Naomi had verified independently, never once been unprepared in a courtroom. She reviewed the folder with the same quiet efficiency Elias had shown, and she surfaced 3 additional facts that Naomi had not yet assembled. The first was that the joint business account Derek maintained for his brokerage had, over 18 months, received 11 transfers from a client account he had not disclosed to their joint tax preparer. The total was $73,000. This was not a clerical oversight. It was a parallel income stream he had been sheltering, which meant the financial disclosure he had filed with the divorce petition was not merely optimistic. It was fraudulent. The second was that Courtney Rains was not simply a waiting girlfriend. She was a licensed freight broker who had, in the previous 12 months, received referrals from Derek's brokerage that redirected commissions away from the marital estate. He had been building her a business on money that was partly Naomi's, the way a person quietly furnishes a second home while the first one is still occupied. The third fact was the one that closed the case before it opened. Naomi had purchased, 3 years before she met Derek and never commingled with any marital account, a 30% stake in a cold storage logistics company headquartered in Memphis. She had purchased it with money from her first director-level salary on the advice of her father, and she had kept it in a trust registered in her grandmother's surname. The stake had appreciated. It was now worth $4 million. Derek's financial disclosure had not mentioned it because he did not know it existed. He had built his entire exit strategy on an inventory of her assets that was missing its most significant line item. Claudette set down the trust document and said he went to considerable trouble to take from a woman he fundamentally underestimated. That seems to be a pattern, Naomi said. It won't be a comfortable one for him by the time this is finished, Claudette said. That same evening, Naomi went home to the East Nashville house and made dinner. Roasted chicken, green beans, rice, a meal that required attention and rewarded it, the kind of meal she made when she wanted her hands occupied and her mind free to work. Derek came home at 7 and sat at the table and said the chicken was good. She thanked him. He talked about a freight client in Louisville. She asked a question, and he answered it. She cleared the dishes. He went to watch television. She washed the pots in the quiet kitchen and looked out the window at the screened porch she had rebuilt with her own hands. The painted boards pale against the dark yard, and she thought about all the things in this house that bore her mark, and all the things Derek had looked at without seeing. He was performing for an audience that only existed in his own head. Some things you don't say out loud. You simply know them, and then you move. The mediation was held at Claudette's office on a Friday morning in February. Derek arrived with his attorney, a compact man in a gray suit who had the careful posture of someone who had been briefed, but not fully briefed, which was the posture of a man about to have a difficult morning. Courtney Rains did not attend, which was the correct choice. Derek sat across the conference table with the particular composure of a man who believed he understood the shape of the room. He had, after all, planned this. He had spent nearly 2 years engineering a financial exit. He had filed first. He had moved the money. He had, in his own accounting, done everything correctly. What he had not done was ask, even once in 7 years, about the trust. Claudette placed the first document set on the table. The fraudulent financial disclosure. The $73,000 in undisclosed broker income. The redirected commissions to Courtney Rains' brokerage. She laid them in a single calm row, the way a logistics director lays out a shipment manifest. Start to finish. Nothing out of order. Nothing missing. Derek's attorney leaned across and reviewed the top document. Then he set it down and wrote a brief note on his legal pad, and did not look up for a moment. Derek's composure began its adjustment. It was not sudden. It moved in stages, the way a person processes an accounting discrepancy when they realize the error is not in the column they were checking. Claudette then placed the trust document on the table. The 30% stake in the Memphis Cold Storage Company. The $1.4 million valuation. The date of purchase, 3 years before the marriage, documented and clean. My client's pre-marital asset holdings, Claudette said simply, were not included in the disclosure your client filed. We'll need to discuss why. Derek's attorney asked for a 10-minute recess. Claudette said of course. When they returned, Derek had reorganized his expression into something that approximated conciliation. He said, "Across the table, Naomi. I think we can resolve this without making it harder than it has to be." She looked at him steadily. She said nothing. He said, "I made some decisions I'm not proud of. But I don't want this to become something that hurts both of us." Her father, who had been seated quietly at the end of the table in his capacity as her personal counsel, said, without heat, without any particular inflection, the time for that consideration was before the filing. Derek, not during it. Derek looked at her father. He looked back at Naomi. He looked at the documents arranged between them, at the audit trail that mapped, with the precision of a supply chain flow chart, exactly how far his planning had fallen short of what it needed to account for. Naomi picked up her copy of the settlement terms Claudette had prepared and placed it in front of him. "You spent 2 years deciding what my life was worth," she said. "I'd like you to read what it's actually worth. Take your time." She folded her hands on the table and waited. He signed 2 hours later. The settlement returned her documented contributions to the joint savings account, assigned her the full equity in the East Nashville house, required restitution of the redirected broker commissions with interest, and included a fraud notation that would accompany any filing his attorney made in the state of Tennessee for the next 7 years. Courtney Rains' brokerage license application, which had been pending for 3 months, was flagged by the state board for review based on the commission diversion documentation. Derek walked out of the building into a February afternoon that was gray and very cold, and Naomi did not watch him go. She was already reviewing the next document Claudette had placed in front of her. She had more to build. 10 months later, Naomi sat on the back porch she had rebuilt, the one with the pale painted boards and the screened frame she had re-leveled with a carpenter's tool and her own steady hands. The morning was cool enough for a cardigan, and she wore one, cradling a mug of coffee she had made before the sun fully cleared the tree line. The yard was quiet. The oak at the back corner of the lot, which she had learned from a neighbor had been planted by the previous owner's grandmother, had turned the particular amber it turned every November, reliable as a delivery schedule. Her firm had, in the months following the divorce, promoted her to Senior Director of Supply Chain Operations and assigned her oversight of the Nashville and Memphis regional networks, simultaneously, a combined portfolio that represented the largest operational footprint she had ever managed. The work required everything she knew, and occasionally required things she was still learning, which was how she preferred it. She had been introduced to Marcus Webb at a freight industry dinner in the spring, a quiet man who worked in contract law, which had struck her at the time as either coincidence or symmetry. He had asked her to dinner 3 weeks later by writing a brief, direct note on the back of his business card, which she had found a more considered gesture than most. He was present rather than performative, and he listened when she talked with the attention of someone who was genuinely processing what was being said rather than waiting for his turn to speak. That had been enough to start. She had heard, through a mutual professional contact, that Derek's brokerage license had been suspended pending a state review of the commission irregularities surfaced during the mediation. Courtney Rains had relocated to Birmingham. Dorothy Holt, Derek's mother, had called Naomi in the spring, not to discuss any of it, but to ask how she was. And the two of them had talked for 30 minutes about nothing consequential, which was the whole point. The house had been reappraised. The porch added more value than Derek had ever noticed it was worth. Marcus came through the back door with his own coffee and stood at the porch rail looking at the yard without feeling the need to fill the quiet with words, which was something she had noted early and did not take for granted. She watched the oak hold its color in the morning light. She thought about her father's sentence, the one he had said in his office when she was 19, and she had written down on the back of an envelope and kept for 18 years. The error exists before you look for it. Start from that assumption. She had started from that assumption. She had looked carefully, and she had found what was there, and she had moved accordingly. Her father had told her once, in the last year of his practice, that the most dangerous position a person could occupy was the one where they knew exactly what they had, but had never once asked what they were missing. Derek had known exactly what he had. She took a long sip of coffee. The morning settled around the porch with a particular unhurried quality of a day that had nowhere urgent to be. She was free. She was solvent. She was unbothered. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. She had found better uses for her attention. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.